Welcome to FO Podcasts. With me is Christopher Schell, whom elderly ladies in town have designated the most eligible bachelor in Washington, D.C.
I'm eligible. My mom is furious about it, but I am eligible. That's true.
Well, yes. And I was wondering about a fat and ugly chap who seems to be much more popular with younger ladies than you.
Oh.
Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah. He's also more popular with DAs, district attorneys at the moment.
Exactly. So this popular chap with beauty queens and porn stars seems to be in trouble. What's going on, Texan?
Emphasis on the porn stars right now. Well, the answer is this case appears to be a bit of a bank shot, maybe even quite a bank shot. And even Democrats who've been rooting this on don't like it.
Hold fire. Our Indian listeners and our European listeners, tell them what a bank shot is.
A bank shot, it is something that you hope to achieve by other means. So in basketball, you hit it off the back of the board to try to get it in the hoop. So it takes an angled play here. At any rate, the charge, I'm going to walk you through this charge just to understand why it appears to be a bank shot. And the charge is falsifying business records and paying off to women, but that's a misdemeanor and it's past the statute of limitations.
So hold fire. Statute of limitations in law generally is the time limit to charge someone. So let's say someone did something which wasn't hugely major, and 5 years elapse, or 7 years elapse, or 8 years elapse, whatever the limitation is in the country. After that, you cannot charge them.
Right. And in this case, I think it was 2 years. So the DA, District Attorney Alvin Bragg, is saying that this misdemeanor, the way he gets around this, was in furtherance of another crime, which bumps it up to a felony. And
what is a felony? Very quickly.
Well, a felony is a criminal charge as opposed to a civil charge.
Yeah, as opposed to a misdemeanor, which is
misdemeanor.
A misdemeanor is, where you're Italian and you pinch someone's bottom and you say, well, I made a mistake. All right?
In today's world, I don't know if that's even a misdemeanor in America. And in Italy, that's still a misdemeanor.
Exactly. You have your bunga bunga parties, and that's okay too.
You could be PM.
Exactly. You could be prime minister.
Yeah.
But if, let's say, you were engaging in the sort of stuff that Hollywood chap, what was his name? The producer.
Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein.
If you're doing what Harvey Weinstein is doing, then it's a very serious crime. It's a felony.
Yes.
So that's the distinction.
Right. So they're getting around this misdemeanor as well as this 2-year statute by saying this misdemeanor was in furtherance of another crime. And that bumps it up to a felony. You get around the statute. So what is the other crime? Well, it seems to be that Trump falsified his business records to cover up a damaging story. And here's the important part: while he was campaigning for federal office. So this is basically a campaign finance violation. Now, I say seems to be because this pivotal allegation isn't even spelled out in the indictment. So in Alvin Bragg's words, he says, quote, "the law does not so require," end quote.
And who's Alvin Bragg?
Alvin Bragg is the district attorney from Manhattan who is bringing this case. Mm-hmm. So that's very odd. The federal government actually looked into this, declined to prosecute. So did Alvin Bragg's predecessor. They looked at it. But now New York is sort of reversing itself and stepping in to bring a federal suit that the feds declined to prosecute. And many suggest the New York DA prosecuting a federal crime is not permitted. So the underlying federal campaign finance law itself even says that this law doesn't apply to federal elections except in peripheral matters. So what does that mean in brass tacks? Bragg will have to argue that campaign finance is tangential to the crux of his argument.
Is tangential or critical?
No, it's tangential.
Okay.
Because the federal election, it's a law itself says that they can't go after it unless it is peripheral. So Bragg has to show also Trump's mens rea, his
which
state
means
of
intention.
Mind. Yeah.
So the crime is not just the act, which is the actus reus. So the action itself, but you have to prove that someone had the intention. Let's say, a very simple example, if our Texan friend was playing with his gun and it went off, and I died. It would be a very sorry thing, of course, for me. Maybe not so much for him.
Now I got to move your body somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. But that in itself would not be tantamount to qualify for murder unless the prosecutor could prove that Christopher Schell intended to put a bullet through Atul Singh's heart because he's a smart ass.
I'm a good shot, aren't I?
Yeah, exactly.
Even accidentally.
Yeah, exactly. And then, if he could prove it was intentional, not accidental, then Christopher goes to bad jail and gets to pump iron.
That's right. I do. With a lot of other dudes. So kind of my three questions are this. Why is the DA bringing these charges now? This seemed to be on the minds of a lot of people who were in the room for the press conference Bragg had, and he didn't really answer that. Some asked, is there new information? And Bragg suggested there might be new information. So 2, what is DA Alvin Bragg's long game? A lot of people say this looks very political. And
so you mean he is the first ambitious district attorney in America?
Well, he's being fed. His donors will love this. He's being fed by everyone else.
So district attorneys have. Elliot Spitzer in the past arose from that very office or a similar office. And many district attorneys have made their name on the carcasses of other politicians and criminals. After all, Rudy Giuliani was a top prosecutor before he became a politician. So
Absolutely.
It's a familiar path in America.
It is. And not only that, he gets to be the first DA to ever indict and prosecute a former president.
Oh, he's written his name in the history books.
He has.
Bragg has done well. He can brag about it.
He can brag. And the joke makes itself. There's a lot of that floating around. And of course, the big question is, what does this mean for Trump? Now, it's worth noting the trial, the next court date, isn't until December. And we're going to be pretty close to the Iowa caucuses, thick in the time period when he's running for office. So how does Trump utilize this, and how do Democrats weaponize this and everything else?
It's a whole fire. I mean, The Economist and many other pundits, word from India, of course, shamelessly stolen by the British, along with that word loot.
Yeah.
But anyway, they are opining that this is like Twitter in the previous campaign for Trump. This has given his flagging campaign oxygen. Trump is now back. And this is a scary proposition for the Democrats.
Well, in some ways, quite the contrary.
Yeah.
Democrats love the idea of Biden running against Trump. They're worried about DeSantis. So
I'm talking of the pundits right now.
The pundits.
And
absolutely.
The economists, not the Democrats.
Look, for the Democrats.
They worry that Trump could be back like Dracula.
They do, and that's a good thing for them. But the other thing they like about this is any time...
Who's they?
Democrats, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Any amount of time...
Democrats. Not all pundits are Democrats.
The ones I've been watching are. And
but you live in America, mate.
I do. But any time spent talking about Trump is time not spent talking about inflation or economic concerns or the impending disaster, in my opinion, of entitlements in this country. So... they kind of like having Trump front and center. And I maintain they've always resuscitated him. I mean, the January 6th committee was decidedly skewed in its composition. And this gave Trump the ability to fight back.
And you make the argument that in the primaries, Democrats boosted Trumpsters and centrist Republicans like you got left in the wayside.
That's true. Not only did they boost them, they funded them. Tens of millions of dollars, and almost they all lost.
Okay, so crack on. Let's rifle through this. We have other issues to cover too.
Bragg's clearly bringing this about for political reasons. He may think he's got something going on, but Bragg has also refused to prosecute a lot of felonies. So people are saying, well, you're softer on crime, but you're going after Trump. Would anybody other than Donald J. Trump be indicted criminally and prosecuted criminally for these charges? And a lot of people are saying probably not.
So it's a weak case, and it also exemplifies double standards on the part of Bragg.
I think it does.
So what does this mean for Trump, and what does this mean for America?
And everyone is talking about that. No one knows for sure. People have talked about how dour Trump appeared in the courtroom. However, people are also commenting that he loves it. He gave a rally that very night after he made his first appearance.
I mean, he has a lot of energy, I must say, for an old man who eats hamburgers.
He does. He's not low energy, is he?
Yeah.
No,
you could learn something from him and be more popular with young women.
I could, yes. Trump has a lot of energy, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
But no one really knows how this will affect his standing in the polls. Right now, Trump, in a head-to-head with DeSantis, his chief opponent, Trump's out ahead. But then when you pair DeSantis against Biden and Trump against Biden, only DeSantis wins.
So this is bad news for DeSantis.
Well, it's bad news for DeSantis, A, because he's not in the news anymore, and Democrats enjoy
what a
beating
poor
up on
chap.
him.
I mean, he gave Disney a beating, and even that was not enough.
And that didn't work out so well, did it? So at any rate, no one knows exactly. Trump is enlivened by this. We're going to have this courtroom showdown in the thick of the primaries, and no one knows for sure who comes out on top. This will certainly animate Trump's base, no doubt about that.
So on the whole, this may be good news for Trump. The jury is still out what happens thanks to this case for America.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, so from that, let's go into something a bit farther afield. Taiwan. We recently had a visit here from the president.
Tsai Ing-wen came and met the Speaker of the House on U.S. soil, the very first time in history.
At the Reagan Presidential Library. That, I think, is worth noting.
Library, the Great Cold Warrior.
That's right. So that's ruffled a lot of Chinese feathers.
Understandably so.
Understandably, but they're in a bit more of a precarious position than they were when Speaker Pelosi went.
Let's loop back, as Rory Stewart says in his podcast, and look at the broader issue. Well, both the nationalists and the communists had a bish-bash-bosh in Taiwan. The Chinese Communist Party won, the Kuomintang lost, and actually that was the first time the CIA, which was then the OSS, intervened abroad. So America goes back a long way. And in fact, many of the Americans involved in the thick of it took the view that the communists were more impressive, the Kuomintang were far more corrupt, and the communists would win. Ipso facto, America should have bet on the communists. But given America's ideological predilections, America basically backed Kuomintang, and things carried on until a Republican president, actually, Nixon. Richard Nixon took the U.S. to China, and under Henry Kissinger, the Chinese and the U.S. had a deal. And as per that deal, going back to 1972, they have a one China policy. The US has a one China policy. What does that mean? The US recognizes that both Taiwan and China are basically one country. Now, it was fine at the time because Kuomintang at that time ruled Taiwan in a dictatorship. They believed in the one China principle, and the Chinese Communist Party believed in the one China principle. Taiwan has since then become a democracy, and as democracies tend to, it's become messy. President Tsai Ing-wen is from the Democratic People's Party. She's not from the Kuomintang. Taiwan has been de facto independent for a while. There's a desire now to basically behave as an independent state and have the recognition on top. And basically, the times have moved on. And America's one China policy, which China calls one China principle, very different, are now under strain.
Well, and also Biden has made the waters a little bit muddier with several comments about how we would go to Taiwan's aid. Now, the Chinese right now are in an interesting position because there is a former Kuomintang president who's touring the country. Additionally, the Chinese probably know that anything they do right now could taint the upcoming election and drive the Taiwanese away from the Kuomintang.
Yeah, look, I mean, at the heart of this issue, there are three dilemmas. What is the dilemma for Taiwan? Well, Taiwan wants to defend its autonomy and not provoke invasion. What is the dilemma for China? It wants to assert ownership and avoid war, especially with the US.
Yes.
What is the dilemma for the US? It wants to deter a potential Chinese invasion whilst doing enough or doing just about enough without provoking a Chinese invasion. So everyone is walking a tightrope right now.
And there are complaints that arms sales to Taiwan have been slower than many would want. Obviously, one, the U.S. doesn't want to provoke China too much. Two, a lot of our arms and munitions that we have in storage and stockpiles are being depleted because of the war in Ukraine. So there's not as much to go around. There's not enough, frankly. So it's a bit more of a tightrope at this point.
Yeah. But the Taiwan issue will not go away. It is one of the great flashpoints in the world. And if you want to learn more, you should go to the dialectic where retired CIA officer Glenn Carl and I discuss this in great length. One of the things before we move on to the next topic to remember is that Taiwan is basically the mecca of semiconductors, particularly the most advanced ones, largely designed here in the US, but they are manufactured to a high degree in Taiwan. They have bet big on this, and therefore Taiwan is super important, not just to the US, but to the rest of the world.
Well, it's also worth noting the company to which I believe you're referring, TSMC.
TSMC.
Yes.
There's a short explainer piece on Fair Observer, which I wrote about it.
They want to build a large factory here, and they want to use a recently passed bill to get some
CHIPS
subsidies,
Act,
the CHIPS Act.
Yeah.
And so,
which Taiwanese worry about, because if the CHIPS Act succeeds here, then there is less of an incentive for the US to go and defend Taiwan. So it gets very, very, very tricky.
But it also gets tricky in that there are additional regulatory burdens that have been placed within the CHIPS Act that are driving costs way up. And so the Taiwanese are saying, hey, this is now 4 or 5 times as expensive. But another issue that's not going away is the price of oil.
Speaking of prices.
We're going from chips to energy, the two big things in the world. And OPEC Plus has made some recent moves here. So Atul, what's your take on that?
Well, they cut production by 1.18 million barrels per day, which is no small amount, considering that the global production is roughly 100 million barrels per day. So it's a 1% cut. Earlier, Russia had announced a voluntary cut of 500,000 barrels per day. So you're having a squeeze on the supply side. Remember that the predictions are that this year we will have record demand. So let's just walk through the logic. Supply goes down, demand goes up. So price of oil is likely to remain higher. There'll be upward pressure on the price of oil, which means inflationary pressures will feed into the economy, which means that central banks will have to raise interest rates, which means that banks will be in greater trouble, such as Credit Suisse, such as Silicon Valley Bank, which means that banks could go under, and this could feed into a larger contagion into the economy. It may not, but that risk has just gone up.
So pressure on banks at a time when banks are struggling in some ways. But that's all the what. Yeah. I get that. Where's the why? Why do it now?
Why do it now? Well, read the tea leaves. What has happened after the Russia-Ukraine war has been a realignment. Saudi Arabia had a deal with the US. That deal was first brokered by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Ibn Saud. We will guarantee your fat ass on the throne, and you will feed our addiction to oil.
Yeah, fat or old. Used to be old.
Exactly, used to be old. Now, over time, America has become energy independent. And therefore, America doesn't need Saudi Arabia as much. Besides, when the Arab uprisings happened, Barack Obama was appreciative of the democratic winds of change blowing through the region. This really made the House of Saud very vulnerable. When Joe Biden was campaigning, he said he would make Saudi Arabia a pariah state. This made them further cross. So basically, Saudi Arabia has now done a deal with Iran, their historic Shia enemy. They are a Wahhabi Sunni kingdom.
Sure.
And they've done a deal with the revolutionary power. And remember, in 1979, the revolution succeeded in Iran. There was the siege of the Grand Mosque in Mecca that didn't succeed. So the Saudis have always been paranoid about Iran. But now here are these two sworn enemies making out because China said you should make nice with each other. Yeah. And so enter the dragon in the Middle East for the first time.
Well, and to go back to your point about Biden, yes, Biden did sort of, hit the nose of the Saudis, but he also did something else. And that is that he wanted to reduce the use of oil, the production of oil in America. America used to have a little bit of leeway there.
You have fracking, you have natural gas, and this whole push towards clean and green energy means that America now has a weak spot. And the Saudis are now pinching on it. Because, look, it's in the...
As demand is rising, because now Europe is relying more on imports.
Exactly, absolutely, because the Russian gas has been cut off. So what has happened? Demand has risen. Supply in America has gone down. Supply from Russia has been cut off to some degree. And the Saudis are exporting now. Their biggest importer is China. As Glenn Cole always says, that back in the days of colonization, trade followed the flag. Now the flag follows trade because now their economic destiny is east.
Yes.
And because it's in their interest for the price of oil to be up, and also because the Saudis are more comfortable with authoritarian regimes such as Russia and China, and don't like America's democratic agenda, in particular, the Democratic Party's democratic agenda, universal democratization of the world. They have said, look, we were in love once, we had great times, but now we are hopping from your arms into the Chinese bed.
Yes.
And by the way, we are going to make money out of it, so screw you.
Yes, and those pressures have become so acute. President Biden did something he very much didn't want to do and was pilloried for it. He approved some leases in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and there will be quite a bit of production in the future. But progressives in this country didn't like it. But I think Joe Biden recognized that the pressure is too acute. It's too big a political liability.
But that's the America view. And that is relevant to America. But for globally, this is a terrible step, because globally, the price of oil will mean sustained inflation in food, fuel, and fertilizer prices. Lots of poorer countries, particularly in Africa, will not be able to shoulder the debt burden with rising interest. They will go under. They will struggle to make interest rate payments. You will probably get some regimes tumbling, such as Sri Lanka tumbled. So we are looking at massive implications, particularly in the poorer countries, where we'll see a lot of suffering, more hunger, more financial distress, and the entire edifice of the global economy, particularly with debt, which about a couple of years ago, it was 256% of the global GDP. That debt, particularly sovereign debt, will increasingly look iffy.
Well, on that happy note, I guess this is the Chaos podcast. So
let's look at the bright side. Hopefully, you will graduate from elderly ladies to young women,
well,
like another Republican, Donald Trump.
I think the listeners were more enlivened and happier when they heard about porn star payoffs than the doom and chaos we presented after that. But there it is. Well, thank you all for listening, and Atul, signing off here.
Yeah. And make sure that you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, on Google. You sign up for our newsletter, which is free. You follow us on social media if you're on social media, and you can write to us. Both Christopher and I would love to hear from you. We want feedback. What are the topics you want us to talk about? In the future, we will be doing a deep dive on debt.
Fantastic.
And it'll begin with American debt, and that Christopher will hold forth. We'll hear the Republican view on that. And then he will grill me on...
Hey, facts are facts,
exactly.
man.
And he can grill me on global debt.
There we go.
And there you go. So, so far, so good. All the best. Bye for now.
Cheers, y'all.